After the fascist Euromaidan coup brought Poroshenko to power in 2014, what was the first thing he did? Well, as Martin Niemöller said about Nazi Germany, first they came for the communists. And that's exactly what Ukraine did. The communist parties and other leftist parties were outlawed. Then what happened? The Russian-speaking population in the eastern regions were told that they are no longer allowed to speak their language in public. And if they did, they would be punished. Where's the logic in this? Banning a language? Not only a language, but one of the main languages that was spoken there, Russian. If America made a law saying that Hispanics can no longer speak Spanish, people would rightfully be outraged. But there's nothing but silence when it happens to Russians. Why the hell does mainstream media never talk about this? Why does mainstream media never talk about the Odessa trade union massacre, where the trade union center in Odessa were attacked by members of this group called the Right Sector, a neo-Nazi group supported by the people behind us, NATO. These fascist subhuman thugs burned the trade union house and shot at people who were jumping out of the building. And these are the people that get dollars from our taxpayers here at home. $60 billion to Ukraine. Why can't we give $60 billion to our crumbling healthcare system, our crumbling education system? Why can't we give that money to the desperate people of Chicago, where I'm from, who can't walk out without the fear of being robbed or shot, who can't afford decent healthcare or education? Why do we have to help Ukraine, but we can't help the people of our own damn country? Who will be the first American to die in a war with Russia? A steel worker from Pennsylvania? A propane plant worker from Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska? Working class people, blue collar people, people my age. Onto another front. Why the hell are we giving aid to the Zionist state of Israel? These schmucks behind us want to talk about supposed Russian war crimes, but turn the blind eye to the crimes of the Zionist state. Israel is horrifying the world right now. Russia goes out of their way to protect civilians and their defensive special military operation. Israel, on the other hand, intentionally targets civilians. They bomb hospitals, they bomb schools, they bomb UN workers, they bomb journalists, and they intentionally massacre children. Historically, I haven't been religious, but I've been praying to God when I started seeing all those children in Gaza being massacred and slaughtered. And you know who supports Israel? The folks behind us, NATO, the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization. This is Western hypocrisy and double standards. When our allies do it, it's okay. And that's why we're here to say, disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Thank you, folks.
Despite the great sacrifice made in many places, starting with those still being made by the Palestinian people in Gaza and all other territories occupied by the State of Israel, it's clear that the forces of imperialism, first and foremost American imperialism, seem to be increasing in increasing difficulty in all four corners of the globe. People are rising up and refusing to accept the same old diktats as we have seen in Africa. Attempted coup d'etat driven by Yankee imperialism, most recently in Bolivia, are being fought. In Ukraine, NATO has sent billions of dollars in aid to the corrupt, fascist Zelensky regime, but to no avail. On the battlefield, the Ukrainian regime continues to accumulate defeat after defeat, while the army on the front line is constantly being pushed back deeper and deeper into the territories that the Ukrainian army was previously able to control, increasingly to the advantage of Russian forces. What we know as the many initiatives to strengthen collaboration and coordination between the various forces currently engaged in the fight for the entire future of mankind. This collaboration is becoming ever closer between the resistance movement themselves. As in Palestine, in this respect, we can only welcome all the efforts made in this direction, including the meeting held first in Moscow, then in Beijing. This strengthened cooperation and collaboration can also be seen in the growing numbers of meetings between the Chinese and North Korean authorities, and more recently between Russia and the DPRK. All this deeply shocked the imperialist forces grounded within NATO. It also shows the extent to which they themselves are beginning to feel the situation heating up for them. This ever-increasing cooperation is also manifesting itself in various initiatives at the level of Communist and Workers' Party and movements, such as the World Anti-imperialist Platform, which is growing in size and presence. It is also evident at state level between governments that would have been separated 10 or 20 years ago. And despite this, certain rapprochements are beginning to occur via vehicles such as the BRICS. Speaking of the BRICS, they are certainly not a panacea that will solve all problems. Nevertheless, by stepping up the pressure for the establishment of a multipolar world, the BRICS are obviously playing a positive role. The fact that Cuba, Bolivia, and Venezuela are talking about joining this group in their turn will at the same time encourage a more left-wing refocusing of the BRICS, and could also, in time, help to counterbalance the recent addition of various countries positioned to the right on a political level. We at the SLN see as equally positive the growing recognition, even within another grouping, the Sao Paulo Social Forum, of the importance of national liberation struggles, for the effective recognition of the right to self-determination, and for the application of this right until the achievement of the independence for people still subject to the diktat of great powers such as the United States or France. We refer in particular to the struggle still being waged by the people of Puerto Rico for their own independence. Of course, we in Quebec see our own struggle to free ourselves from the shackle of Canada and the domination of American imperialism as an integral part of these struggles. Some might think that recent development in the international situation, notably on the battlefields of Ukraine, but also around Taiwan, as well as the rising tension in the Korean Peninsula, will make the situation increasingly dangerous. To a large extent, this is true, except that those who say this, and they often say it to imply that Russia, China, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea should not act as they do, because that would only add fuel to the fire, are overlooking several crucial elements in their own analytical scheme. The same kind of comments could just as easily apply to Iran, the Middle East, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, or Honduras. The first of these elements is the fact that if the same countries at the heart of the present movement against imperialism, along with the Palestinians, African and Latin American peoples, were to decide instead to multiply their compromise with these same forces of imperialism, there will be no real reduction in tensions. On the contrary, the United States, in concert with all its strongest allies, will step up its attack and provocations even further. Because the forces of imperialism have no use for peace, justice, or respect for peoples. When they finally accept peace, it's usually because they've been forced to do so because they no longer have a choice. Standing up to imperialist forces and at the same time working to build a broad anti-imperialist united front is not a self-destructive strategy. On the contrary, it's the only realistic approach suited to the situation we now find ourselves in. It's the only approach that can save us from total destruction, just as the international communist movement once advocated a worldwide anti-fascist coalition, which in the Second World War help not only to crush fascist vermin, but to save humanity in the process. Some will retort, but what about a possible spillover of all current conflicts toward a possible all-out nuclear war that could wipe us all? What those who talk like this forget is that the current united front in its core, including its core, 3 countries, which do indeed have nuclear weapons, but that it is at the same time the fact that they are more united than ever that will make the American imperialism think twice before taking the risk of using such nuclear weapons. If these 3 countries, namely Russia, China, and the DPRK, weren't so united, if they didn't demonstrate an increasingly remarkable ability to stand their ground, then perhaps the US would think it had more room to maneuver than it does at the present. But the United States knows that any frontal attack against one or another of these 3 countries will automatically provoke a response from the other 2. We also still remember what Donald Trump was quick to say, namely that we could simply wipe the entire Korean peninsula off the map with a few atomic bombs. In the early 50s, American General MacArthur had also made similar remarks against the Korean people. But the American authorities never implemented these measures. Why not? Precisely because of the presence of the USSR and China, who were then united behind the DPRK, just as Russia and China are today. Yes, the danger of a possible world war is always there in front of us. In some respect, it has already begun, not in the form of a so-called war between imperialists, but rather a war on the one hand of the people of the world who increasingly wish to rid themselves of oppression and injustice, and on the other, those who would like to maintain the same system of oppression by force. A broad anti-imperialist united front is being built across the globe, and this is in line with what the global anti-imperialist platform aims to promote. This can only help us in the longer term in the face of all the current tensions, which are bound to grow, not diminish. The more the already broad global support movement for Palestinian people continues to grow, the more it will help strengthen the anti-imperialist united front. A major awareness raising and propaganda campaign to better explain what's at stake in the Ukraine and Russia, as well as the Taiwan question and what's happening in the Korean Peninsula, would be just as important. The confusion that still exists in many people's mind on these issues can only hinder efforts to further consolidate the disgraced anti-imperialist united front. A better understanding of the potential of the various struggles being waged by different peoples in all 4 corners of the globe to gain recognition for their own right to self-determination will help just as much, because this is also an essential aspect of the current upsurge and struggle around the world. Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
The NATO Summit The NATO Summit will be held in Washington, D.C. from July 9th to July 11th. Their main agendas will be the war in Ukraine and quote-unquote deterrence and defense from NATO, and intensifying cooperation between the AP4, or Asia-Pacific Partners countries, which includes Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. The U.S. State Department, addressing the agenda on the war in Ukraine, blatantly expressed its plot to prolong the war by saying, quote, Ukraine should be in a position to continue this fight into 2025, unquote. Meanwhile, the Biden administration mobilized all U.S. allies in West Asia and the Middle East, including not only Israel, but also Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Tunisia, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, for this meeting. Experts have mentioned that creating a Middle Eastern version of NATO has been a long-held ambition of successive U.S. administrations. A series of facts demonstrates that this NATO summit is a plotting meeting for World War III. NATO is expanding its reach to the Indo-Pacific region. The NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg spouted sophistry regarding China-Russia cooperation, stating, quote, China is inciting the largest military conflict in Europe since World War II, unquote. Regarding NATO AP4 collusion, he said, quote, our security is not regional, it is global, unquote. The U.S. State Department recklessly remarked that both Japan and the ROK have been very good partners in addressing the supposed threat posed by Russia, and that the security concerns faced in the Indo-Pacific are very similar to those that are faced in NATO's Article 5 territory. The U.S., Japan, and the ROK agreed to the content corresponding to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty's concept of collective security at the Camp David Summit in August 2023, and decided to conduct regular multi-domain joint military exercises, which are similar to NATO military exercises. As NATO's expansion to the east provoked the Ukraine war, the Indo-Pacificization of NATO is causing the opening of the war to East Asia. The war is imminent in East Asia, and the fronts are expanding in both Eastern Europe and West Asia. The U.S. imperialist aggressive forces are utilizing the pro-U.S. fascist power in the ROK as their proxy for the war in the ROK, and conducting war exercises against the DPRK day after day, while manipulating pro-U.S. warmongering forces in the Philippines and separatist forces in Taiwan to carry out aggressive military exercises against China, and moving Japanese militarism forces as a strike group for the war in East Asia. From January to May, the U.S. and NATO conducted large-scale invasion exercises near Russia and recently allowed their homeland-supplying weapons to strike Russia. The Ukrainian neo-Nazi military fired U.S.-made Adams missiles with prohibited cluster bombs at Sevastopol and massacred civilians, instigating the war in Eastern Europe. Zionist Israel, which slaughtered over 40,000 Palestinians, is fanatically expanding the war in West Asia by bombing the Iranian consulate in Syria in April and precipitating an all-out war with Hezbollah of Lebanon in June. We must crush the imperialist aggressive war drive with the worldwide anti-imperialist camp and imperialist camp clash. The truth and justice become clearer whose side they are on. The anti-imperialist camp firmly holds the justification of anti-fascism, liberation, and reunification, which the imperialist camp can never deny. The nuclear missile superpowers of the anti-imperialist camp, DPRK, China, and Russia, are growing stronger. At the same time, they firmly unite with Iran and other axis of resistance countries, along with the world anti-imperialist movements. In contrast, the USA, European imperialism, and pro-US fascist countries are pushing World War III in full swing, and manipulating the quote-unquote new Cold War framework as internal overall crisis deepen. It is common sense that the side with both justification and strength wins the war. Awakened and united people of the world will bring an end to imperialism with vigorous anti-imperialist joint struggle and put forward a new era of global independence and peace at the McPherson Square, Washington, D.C. Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Disband NATO!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!